So here I go, talking about the economy when I don't understand the subject. Disclaimer, I don't have a degree, I don't have any formal training, but I do have an opinion. I know. So I decided that I'm not going to offer explanations, imply cause and effect, because I simply don't understand them as well, and I don't claim to. I think I'm going to just provide numbers here, and I'm going to attach my sources to the video, description box of the video. If you guys disagree, and want to enlighten me, go ahead, I'd be happy to listen. I'm a pretty open-minded guy about this. So the first thing I want to discuss is the budget. Obama's budget is very high, but the thing is, the components of the budget did not necessarily belong to Obama. For example, the cost of the Iraq War is in the budget, Obama's budget, and it's in the deficit, Obama's deficit. But would you blame it on him? Of course not. I think it's pretty fair to say that the Iraq War is something that Obama inherited from Bush. So I think it's important to look at the components of the budget and not the budget as a whole, and the components of the deficit and not the deficit as a whole, to see what Obama is actually responsible for and what he actually inherited. To that effect, I'll post a link to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, a study that they did, and it shows a chart explaining the components of the deficit. You can see that the only major contribution to the deficit by Obama is the stimulus, and the cost of that goes down in time. Bush's two wars, the tax cuts, TARP, and the economic crash that started under him account for most of the deficit. That started under Bush account for most of the deficit. But remember that the economic crash occurred in late 2008, so that all the deficit from that crash would not be accounted in Bush's 2008 budget, but they'll be accounted in Obama's 2009 budget. So it seems like it's Obama's fault, even though it's not. But Republicans painted it that way anyway, dishonestly. In fact, in the video you'll see below, some Republican makes that dishonest point right to Obama's face, and he even brings up his kids. It's disgusting. But it's really funny to watch how Obama schools them in the video. You should watch the whole thing. The second issue is the cause of the crash. It happened when Bush was president and when Congress was Democratic. So who's at fault here? I'm sure everyone agrees that the bankers were greedy and that the housing crisis precipitated the crash. Of course, saying that bankers were greedy is silly, because greed is what makes capitalism work. That's the point. You have to be greedy in capitalism. So let's look at the housing crisis. I have a video where I'm going to post it, where Beck is talking about how the government should not be controlling the prices of homes. Pay attention to the chart that he shows instead of what he says, because it's crazy. The peak of the housing crisis, of the housing prices, and thus the housing bubble, was 2006. That's the same year that Democrats took control of Congress. So from 2000 to 2006, when the housing prices were rising, according to Beck's own chart, was during Republicans' tenure, where they controlled both houses and the presidency. Now, I'm not going to say that it's not the Democrats' fault. I think it is. After 2006, they should have done things. And Clinton, too, when he was president. I think, according to economists, he did a lot of things that helped precipitate the crisis. But you got to put at least some or majority of the blame on Bush and the Republicans, because that's when the bubble rose. That's when the bubble reached its peak, when they were in charge of everything, the Congress and the presidency. And certainly Obama should not be blamed at all for that crisis. I have a very nice nugget in a conservative blog mocking Paul Krugman, the Nobel Prize-winning liberal economist, for predicting the bursting house bubble. He predicted it. And the blog was written before the bubble burst. So it's funny that they're mocking him for something that he got right. He's a little bit late on the years, I think. I think he's a couple of years late, but it's still pretty funny. Pretty much got it right. Now remember that Obama's only significant contribution to the deficit was a stimulus bill. Every Republican I hear keeps saying over and over that the stimulus bill failed. But when it comes time to cutting the ribbons and signing the oversized checks that the stimulus gave, they're hypocrites about it. But if you look at the actual numbers, according to the CBO, the Center for, the Congressional Budget Office, which is nonpartisan, the stimulus bill saved 2 to 4 million jobs. And these are not my numbers. Check it out if you don't believe me. Now, here are some other numbers. The Department of Labor's monthly job report shows that the private sector has been adding jobs consecutively for every month since January. That's 863,000 net gain in jobs since January in the private sector. I'll post that chart up. But I'm also going to post that the public sector, which is also important. You'll see that if you include that, then there's a net loss in jobs. It's due to budget cuts and the temporary census workers, which are being laid off. So I'll add that chart too, just to be fair. Now, obviously, this growth is too slow. Even if we gained 863,000 jobs in the private sector, we lost 700,000 jobs in Obama's first month alone. So after all this time, we barely made up those lost jobs. So the answer to me, I would say, is more stimulus. But let's look at the alternative. Let's look at what the Republicans are proposing. Mitch McConnell is proposing a tax cut that adds $4 trillion to our deficit in the next decade, according to the CBO. Now, if you want to argue that the tax cuts for the rich help, that's fine. Politifact, in fact, says that there's a lot of debate among the experts as to whether spending or a tax cut is more stimulative. Even then, even if you take account of this debate, Obama wants to keep the most stimulative tax cuts, which go for the middle class and for small business and not for the rich. And he wants to do spending, which a lot of economists say is very good at stimulating the economy. Now, even if we want, let's say that I agree with the Republican argument to include tax cuts to the rich, don't forget that this tears a huge hole in the deficit. These guys are not fiscal conservatives by any stretch of the imagination. Now, the question becomes, how do you pay for it? If the Republicans win the House, you had to cut somewhere. Where are you going to cut $4 trillion? So the only places, that is John Boehner, says he wants to extend the age where seniors get Social Security benefits to 70. So seniors will have to retire 5 years later. And I'll post the interview where he says that himself. Paul Ryan, the man who will become the chairman of the House Budget Committee, wants to cut Medicare, Social Security, education, and defense, among other things. I'll post a link to that. His own words. Now, I think it sucks to make seniors pay for tax cuts for the rich, because that's what we're doing. We're extending the seniors' age for retirement to pay for these tax cuts. It should be the opposite. The rich should pay for seniors. I'm not even saying we shouldn't cut Social Security or Medicare. These are tough times, and if cutting into entitlements is necessary to balance a budget, then so be it. But why are we sacrificing our seniors before our millionaires? I think we should have the most well-off people, the people who have 96% employment, the richest of the Americans, to take the larger share of the burden before we hand it off to our seniors. That's just my opinion. Now, no other Republicans have proposed any meaningful cuts of worth $4 trillion. Now, don't forget this additional on top of the deficit we already have. The only thing I've heard Republicans say in defense of not cutting anything is that the rebounding economy will pay for the tax cut. But that wasn't true when Bush gave the largest tax cuts to the rich in history. I'm not even arguing that Bush's tax cuts caused the crash that we've had in 2008, but you have to admit that it didn't pay for it. We ended up in a lot of debt. So there's no guarantee that tax cuts pay for itself. We've had an experience in the past, and it didn't happen. This is a plain fact. So I think as a fiscal conservative, I want a legitimate plan for paying for this. Now, I would think this was a legitimate debate about the whole economy, but it gets scary when Beck starts riling conservatives into thinking that the liberals are genocidal. Then they're not using reason, they're not using logic, they're just using fear, and that scares me, and that's why I'm making this video. I'm trying to use as much information as possible. On healthcare, a poll by top medical school Mount Sinai said that 73% of American doctors support the public option. I'll post that. Also, Obama's plan saves innocent children. I'll post that. And as far as global warming is concerned, every single university has reached the conclusion that global warming is man-made and it's real. End of discussion.